Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to talk about the brachial plexus. So let me start by making a quick drawing of the backbone of the brachial plexus. It's just a quick rough sketch. Okay, alright. So this is the backbone of the brachial plexus. So what I'm going to do now is to add the different parts of the brachial plexus, and then later we're going to talk about the branches and what those branches supply. So we're going to talk about the muscles involved. Okay. So what I'm doing right now is dividing the brachial plexus into its different parts. So what we have here are the roots, and the roots are made of C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1. Okay, and usually the branches that are involved here are the anterior rami. Okay, so there are anterior rami and posterior rami that come from the spinal cord, and the ones involved in the formation of the brachial plexus are the anterior rami of C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1. Okay, so those are the roots. The next part of the brachial plexus are the trunks. And of trunks, we have three trunks. We have the superior trunk, we have the middle trunk, and we also have the inferior trunk. After trunks, we find the divisions. And of divisions, there are three. There's the anterior division, there's the posterior division, and again another anterior division. Now those divisions are made from these branches that you can see here. So those branches have names as well. This one is the posterior branch. This one is the anterior branch. The one underneath is again another posterior branch. So if you take the anterior branch, it's coming from the anterior. It's coming from the posterior division, which is this one right here, and it's linking the posterior division to the anterior division, while this posterior branch arises from the anterior division and goes to the posterior division. Okay, and then finally this posterior branch comes from the anterior division and it goes towards the posterior division. And then finally we have the cords, actually, which are then followed by the terminal branches. Okay, of cords, we have three cords: the lateral cord, the posterior cord, and the medial cord. And of terminal branches, we have five terminal branches. This one is the musculocutaneous nerve. This is the axillary nerve, median nerve, radial nerve, and the ulnar nerve. Okay, so these are the most important branches that you should know from the brachial plexus. So apart from those, there are a few more branches that we need to talk of, and I'll mention all of them now. But before we get to that, what we need to understand is how are these names derived? What is it that makes them be the lateral cord, posterior cord, medial cord? So there is a structure that runs right here in between the brachial plexus, and that's the axillary artery. So like I said, let's keep the artery right here in the middle. Okay, so you can see that this cord runs lateral to the axillary artery, hence why it's called the lateral cord. Okay, and then we can look at this one, the medial cord. It's named as the medial cord because it runs medial to the axillary artery. And then finally we have the posterior cord just underneath it. Okay, hence why it's called the posterior cord. Okay, so remember that the cords are named because of the relation that they have to the axillary artery. So now we can talk a little bit about the branches that arise from the brachial plexus. So we can start here. I'm just gonna draw the ones that arise from the roots and the trunks. So what we have over here is the dorsal scapular nerve. The dorsal scapular nerve is important because it supplies three muscles: the levator scapular muscle, rhomboid major muscle, and the rhomboid minor muscle. Okay, so those muscles are supplied by the dorsal scapular nerve. Then we have the long thoracic nerve. The long thoracic nerve arises from C5, C6, and C7, and it supplies the serratus anterior muscle. Then we have the suprascapular nerve. The suprascapular nerve supplies two muscles, the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus, which are two muscles found on the posterior aspect of the scapula. Okay, the supraspinatus is found on the supraspinous fossa, the infraspinatus in the infraspinous fossa. And then we have the subclavian nerve, and as the name suggests, it supplies the subclavius muscle, which is found between the clavicle and the first rib. So those are the branches of the roots and the trunks. So the divisions don't usually have any branches, but there are a few more branches coming out from the cords. So there is one that comes from the lateral cord, which is the lateral pectoral nerve. So with that, there is also one that arises from the medial cord, which is known as the medial pectoral nerve. So these two branches together supply the pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor muscles. Okay, so they're both important to supply those two muscles. So there are a few more that arise from the posterior cord and two more from the medial cord. So what we have over here is the thoracodorsal nerve. The thoracodorsal nerve is important to supply the latissimus dorsi muscle. Okay, and what we have here, these two are the upper. This is the upper. This is the lower subscapularis nerves, and as the name suggests, supplies the subscapularis muscle. Okay, which is basically again another muscle that is found within the scapula, so on the anterior aspect, also known as the costal surface of the scapula. And then we have two more that we need to talk about. This is the medial cutaneous nerve of the arm. So basically supplies sensory supply to the arm. And this is the medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm. So it supplies the forearm. Okay, so those are the branches that are coming out from the brachial plexus. So we can quickly discuss about the terminal branches as well. So when it comes to the terminal branches, there are two things that you need to know. You need to know from which nerve roots they arise from. So for example, the musculocutaneous nerve arises from C5, C6, and C7. And you also need to know what muscles are innervated by these nerves. Okay, so the musculocutaneous nerve supplies the coracobrachialis muscle, the biceps brachii muscle, and the brachialis muscle. Okay, so these are all muscles found on the anterior aspect of the arm, also known as the anterior compartment or the flexor compartment of the arm. Okay, so then we can talk about the axillary nerve, which arises from C5 and C6 nerve roots. And this one is important to supply the deltoid muscle and the teres minor muscle. So the axillary nerve has both a sensory supply and motor supply. So the motor supply is used to supply these two muscles, but the sensory supply is used to provide sensory supply to the skin above the deltoid, okay, which is also known as the area where the regiment is applied to. Okay, so that area is supplied by the sensory supply or sensory nerve of the axillary nerve. Then there's the median nerve. So both median nerve and radial nerve arise from C5 to T1. So C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1 are the nerve roots which make up the median nerve and the radial nerve. Now, the median nerve is important to supply the flexor compartment of the forearm. Okay, so all the muscles that allow you to flex your wrist and your fingers. But it's also important to supply certain muscles of the hand. So now, when we talk about the hand, there are about 20 muscles that make up the hand, and out of those, 5 out of the 20 are supplied by the median nerve, and those are the first and second lumbricals, as well as the thenar muscles. So within the thenar muscles, there are 3 muscles. Okay, so those 3 and the first and second lumbricals are supplied by the median nerve. Also, the median nerve has sensory supply, so it provides sensory sensation on the flexor compartment of the forearm, as well as in the hand. But we'll talk about the sensory supply to the hand in another video, okay? The radial nerve, like I said, arises from C5 to T1, and it supplies all the extensor muscles of the arm and forearm. So if we talk about the arm, the extensor compartment includes the triceps muscle. So those are supplied by the radial nerve. So any muscles that allows the extension of the wrist or extensions of the fingers are supplied by the radial nerve. Again, the radial nerve has its own sensory supply. So it supplies the skin on the extensor compartment of the arm, extensor compartment of the forearm, as well as the dorsal aspect of the hand. But it gets a little bit more complicated in the hand. That's why there will be a different video for you guys to follow, where I'll be talking about the muscular supply and sensory supply of the hand. And then finally, the ulnar nerve. The ulnar nerve comes from C7 to T1. Okay, so those are the nerve roots that make up the ulnar nerve. The ulnar nerve is also important to supply certain muscles in the forearm, like the flexor carpi ulnaris, for instance. But it's also important to supply muscles of the hand. So out of the 20 muscles that I mentioned earlier, 15 of those muscles are supplied by the ulnar nerve. And those include the third and fourth lumbricals, because the first and the second are supplied by the median nerve. So the third and fourth are supplied by the ulnar nerve. The hypothenar muscles, there are 3 muscles there. And the palmar interossi, dorsal interossi, and the adductor pollicis are all supplied by the ulnar nerve. Like the other nerves, the ulnar nerve has also its own sensory supply. Again, we'll talk about later on. But just keep in mind that it has both motor and sensory supply. Okay, so that concludes the video today on the brachial plexus. If you guys have any questions related to any parts, if you didn't understand any parts of the brachial plexus, or what the branches supply and so on, please leave a message down below in the comment section, and I will get back to you as soon as possible.